So Passover is a celebration that commemorates God bringing the Israelites out of enslavement in Egypt and into the land of Israel. And it's a 7-day celebration in Israel and an 8-day celebration in the diaspora, which means outside of Israel. The events that lead up to or kind of are considered in the Haggadah, which is the book that people use during the Seder, are recorded in Exodus 1 through 15. So I'll just kind of summarize those events. The Israelites cried out to God because they were enslaved by Pharaoh, and God designated Moses to bring the Israelites out of Israel. So Moses and his brother Aaron went to Pharaoh and requested that he let the Israelites go to worship God in the wilderness. And he denied them because God had, quote, hardened his heart, which was interesting. So God then beset the land with 10 plagues, the 10th of which God killed the firstborn child of every Egyptian family, and passed over the doors of the Israelites because they had smeared them with blood that they had killed from a lamb that they had sacrificed to God the night before. So Pharaoh finally allowed the Israelites to leave and said, not literally said, but basically be gone with you. And so the Israelites left so quickly that they didn't have time for their bread to rise. And after he agreed to let them go, he changed his mind and had the Egyptian soldiers rush after them. But so when the Egyptians got to the Sea of Reeds, Moses cried out to God, and there was no way for the Israelites to pass through. So God parted the waters, and the Israelites passed through onto dry land. And when the Egyptian soldiers pursued them, God drew back the waters so that the Egyptian soldiers drowned. So Passover is a home-based rather than a synagogue-based holiday, which I think is potentially partly due to the fact that it was one of the main festivals when the temple still stood, where Israelites would go to the temple and sacrifice to God. So traditionally, Jews thoroughly clean their houses, and they burn the breadcrumbs or chametz that they find directly before Passover begins. And most Jews eat very different foods during Passover than they would normally eat, avoiding bread or anything that's been allowed to rise. So they also use a completely different set of dishes, pots, pans, and silverware. And rabbinic sages say that Jews should not even own any chametz or breadcrumbs, and so they typically sell, in quotes, to a non-Jewish friend, which involves kind of a certificate of exchange, and then buy back those same foods after Passover. And all of this, the removal of chametz or breadcrumbs, represents the yetzer hara, or the evil inclination within us. And it's about really removing that evil inclination and being free from it. So Seder literally means order, and these are the first 2 nights of Passover, or the first 2 nights in the diaspora, the first night in Israel. And the book used for the Seder is called the Haggadah, which comes from the root to tell. So God commanded that every Jew in every generation should believe and experience the holiday of Passover as if she were personally being redeemed from the land of Israel. But notably, there's no one way to observe a Seder. So when I teach my Introduction to Jewish Traditions course in the spring, I have students address a particular Haggadah, and they all present to the class what they have learned from the Haggadah. And so it's really interesting, kind of the differences that they find between them. And kind of pertaining to that, those differences, is that Jews and many other people have been oppressed over the years. And the Seder gives Jews the opportunity to reflect on and discuss those marginalizations, those oppressions. So Judaism is all about passing rituals and practices to the next generation. And the Haggadah is family-oriented for that reason. For one thing, the youngest child asks what are known as the four questions, which are often performed singing. Other rituals in the Haggadah include taking a drop of wine from the glass and putting it on a plate for each of the 10 plagues. Singing Dayenu, which means it would have been enough. And so kind of the context goes something like, if God had parted the sea for us and not brought us through to dry land, it would have been enough. The afikomen, which is half of the 3 matzahs, the middle matzah, and the host typically hides that matzah at the beginning of the meal, and the children, the children go at the end of the evening and find the afikomen, which has been hidden somewhere in the house. And also in the Haggadah, Rabbi Gamliel said that it's you cannot say that you've performed a Seder if you haven't done these 3 things. If you haven't talked about Pesach, or Passover, if you haven't talked about matzah, which is the unleavened bread, and if you haven't talked about maror, which is the bitterness that the Israelites experienced under the slavery of the Egyptians. So I think, therefore, I need to discuss the Seder plate. So the Seder plate includes seven different items, one of which is maror, which represents, as I said, the bitterness of slavery. Zeroah, which is the shank bone, and it represents the lamb that the Israelites sacrificed before the 10th plague, and which they smeared the blood over their doorways. Charoset, which represents the mortar that the Israelites used to bind the bricks together. Supposedly they were building the pyramids. And chazeret, which is a second bitter herb. The significance is the same as the maror. The maror actually is a horseradish. The chazeret is typically romaine lettuce or some other kind of bitter thing. And karpas, parsley is often used for karpas, and it represents hope and renewal. And beitzah, which is an egg. And the egg, the circularity of the egg represents the unity of life and death. So it's also kind of along with these, the Seder plate, it's important that Jews drink 4 cups of wine during the Passover, during the Seder, over the course of the ritual. And kind of along with that, people hope, mainly imaginatively, that Elijah, who's a famous prophet from the Bible, will come to their table, or will somehow kind of appear and have drunk a wine from his cup. So there's a cup of wine for Elijah at the Seder table. And in more recent years, many, many more liberal or progressive Jews, not so much Orthodox Jews necessarily, have a cup for Miriam, which is a cup of water. Miriam is the sister of Moses and Aaron, and she was a prophet, and she led the Israelites to water at various places when they were wandering the desert. So Passover typically ends with rousing songs after people proclaim L'Shana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, which means next year in Jerusalem. And to sum up, Passover is the central event in Jewish history for which Jews thank God. And so it's extremely important for Jews. It's continually referenced in the Torah and in the Tanakh as, do you remember how I brought you out of the land of Israel? And so many American Jews, even if they don't celebrate other rituals, other holidays, they have a Seder or they attend a Seder, and that's maybe the one thing that they do.